Farm workers remain of the working class communities that is of the most challenged in society at the moment, characterized by long working conditions and work that isn't often guaranteed, notwithstanding transport and other related challenges. But why does an apartheid colonial really continue to have its legacy felt on this particular society? Why is alcohol still a big challenge within farming communities? We discuss that and more in this week's show. Workers' World starts now.
From England to Poland, every step across the ocean, the ruling classes them is in a mess. Oh yes, the capitalist system a regress, but the Soviet system now progress. So which one of them?
Welcome to our weekly Workers' World Labour Show. I'm your host, Sharik Trubadi. Thank you once again as we get into a very difficult but necessary subject affecting the working class. And this time around, we focus on the Dopstelsel system, also known as the DOP system. It's been used in farming communities for centuries without repercussions from the government. This system is one in which employees pay their labourers cheap wine instead of a living wage with decent healthcare benefits. Lasting effects such as alcohol addiction and dependency that continue to plague parts of South Africa, more specifically parts of the Northern and the Western Cape. What this does, it traps farm workers and their families in a vicious cycle of poverty. The entrenched culture of alcohol addiction amongst the working class and farming communities by extension has created generations of disadvantaged rural communities, the abuse in the home, and as a result, it contributes to a major system that, of course, we now have called the DOP system. In today's show, we discuss alcohol abuse in farming communities and the impact of the system that it has had on farm workers and those farm worker communities. But first, let's now go to our insert prepared for us by the Workers' World Media Productions editorial team.
I was pregnant.
Congratulations.
3 months.
But do you know that it can be dangerous to your child if you drink, the fetus?
I want to drink. I like to drink.
Alcoholism amongst farm workers has been and continues to be a huge concern. From that time, it has consistently happened that if you want people to just follow you, you want the workers just to do their work and not ask questions, you keep them happy, but you also keep them drunk. And the recurring issue has been around drunkenness, the operating machinery when you're under the influence. On the management part was the loss of productivity because people either don't pitch up for work or they work slower or they make huge mistakes.
So when the colonists first came to the Cape, Dutch colonists, they introduced alcohol as a form of payment. In fact, it wasn't only a form of payment, it was a form of social control. And that is the DOP system, so-called. So what happens today largely is that if workers are alcohol dependent, the farmer will continue to supply them with alcohol, but sell it to them cheaply and sell it to them on credit.
Dat het begin by vroegtydse boere, het dit saans as die mense by die klare werk as hy lang ure, dan moet hulle 'n doppie kom haal. Daai tyd noem hulle die swart varkies. Dan moes hulle daar uit vir hulle gaan wyn uitgooi en so het dit in die generation ingegaan.
Daai tyd was dit gewees dat hulle vir jou R35 miskien 'n week betaal. En nou sê nou jy doen nou Saterdag oortyd werkies. Dan gee hulle vir jou 'n dop vir vergoeding.
Toe ek groot raak, is die dopstelsel sterk nog daar. My pa het so gekry, soggens 'n blikkie, mara blikkie, vierige blikkie en vanaand 'n kannetjie. Dit was hulle se betaling vir die oortyd. Ons as kinders het nie regtig skool gegaan nie. Want jy was 13, dan voel jy eienaar, maar jy's reg vir werk. En so het die dopstelsel by hy 13-jarige kind toe begin. 94 is alles mis gestop. Maar daar is nog sekere van Citrusdalse boere, plaasboere, wat nog dopstelsel aan die mense gee. want mense is te bang om te praat.
Want ons mense het ook baie kere hulle werk verloor deur alkoholmisbruik op die plaas. Die mense, veral as dit reën en so aan, dan gee hulle die ou net 'n dop of twee en dan is hy, en dan hy man gaan en hy gaan pluk. En die probleme wat hier is die boere het sekuriteitsmaatskappye op hulle plaas en dinge so. Die mense wat vir die maatskappye, die sekuriteitsmaatskappye werk, is vriende met die mense op die plase wat ook smokkel en so aan. So daai ouens laat weet vir hulle, luister jy, ons kom vanaand kyk, ons kom plase uitgooi en dinge so. So as hulle dan kom, dan kry hulle net niks.
So the kind of feedback that we've received from many of the communities is that one, alcoholism is still alive, that it's something that government has not really been working at to address. There isn't the recognition that alcoholism is an illness and need to be treated as such. And it's not a once-off treatment, it has to be a consistent program. So where farmers stopped selling in lieu of labor or in lieu of pay, that they would make available wine on the book. So we're talking about a workforce that's not earning a high wage, that's not even earning a above poverty or above breadline wage, and from that already there's a significant amount of that income being ring-fenced to go towards paying the employer for liquor that's been bought on the book. And so workers are happy. Friday they go off and each one is walking off with their can. And what some employers and landowners has allowed is what we refer to, and the farm working community they refer to as the shebeen on wheels. So Friday night there's a bakkie that comes from the nearest town. Now remember that on the farm, entry to the farm is being regulated, right? So if CRLS wants to go into a farm and go and do organizing or training, we cannot do that without the agreement or the approval of the landowner and the farmer or the farm manager, whoever they appoint. So in this instance, that bakkie, the shebeen on wheels, is being allowed to come on the farm and sell liquor. Now whether that money is now being ring-fenced out of the pay, which maybe ethically there would be a problem, is now being ring-fenced because the shebeen guy comes there every weekend and ply their trade. With an increase in unemployment and young people who finish school but are not being employed on the farm, it just opens up a whole other set of challenges for farm worker communities and farm worker families.
All right, so as you would have seen there, we sit with quite a challenge on our hand, and it's not something new. We've all come to realize that alcohol is a significant problem in these communities, but it isn't quite by their choosing. It's possibly by design. Social engineering is what some would call it, and I want to get into that, and we have a panel of guests lined up, and we'll get into this debate in just a bit. Do stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about the farm worker communities that continue to be saddled with legacy issues. And some of these legacy issues are what appears to be by social design. We've all come to know that within farming communities, alcohol is a challenge. But as we would now know, and it has been established, and from that insert that we saw a bit earlier, that these are almost generational. That's because it's been a colonial and an apartheid relic that continues to find place within farming communities, and that's what we want to talk about today. We have a panel of guests, of course, joining us. We have Khafildin Benjamin, the Secretary of AFRIWU, who happens to be the Agriculture, Food, Fishing and Retail Industries Workers Union. We also have from Women on Farms, Lenicia Frank. She is, of course, representing the Women's Health and Empowerment Program. She's the coordinator of that particular program. We'll have some others that may join us a bit later, particularly members from the Boerland to Dorens area that could potentially join us. So do stay with us as we get into our subject here this week, focusing, of course, on the DOP system and alcoholism. I want to start off with you, Lenicia. Thank you very much for having joined us. Maybe give us some sort of a background to what it is that we are saddled with at the moment. Of course, alcohol, a significant challenge. What is your impression, Lenicia, on the situation on the ground with regards to the abuse and the usage of alcohol?
So, good day. So my feedback on that would be that working with so many vulnerable women, we have seen the scars that have been left by the Dopstelsel, and also the effects of addiction and how many women are so vulnerable to gender-based violence.
Recording in progress.
And so it has really left big, great scars because oftentimes women farm workers, they are seasonal workers. So which means that they work from certain periods in the month, in the year where they are unemployed, they are at home. So which now they are dependent on the male partner who oftentimes have an addiction problem of alcohol abuse. And that makes them so much more vulnerable to experiencing gender-based violence and domestic violence.
Okay, and this obviously, Khafildin, has a colonial and an apartheid legacy. What exactly was the practice? So there's a very basic understanding that instead of paying proper wages, workers were given alcohol. What was the impact of this particular method of payment?
Well, we could see if we could see even today's.
Lenicia, I'll come back to you on this issue. I would just want to welcome Khafildin Benjamin at this time. Khafildin, your perspective on this particular method of payment?
Well, if you look at where we are now in history, we have fourth or fifth generation people that were subjected to this horrible practice. These people became farm workers. They were first slaves. They became farm workers, and they were evicted from farms. Some remained on the farms, and we find them in urban areas. So the legacy of this evil system is still with us. They are our neighbors. They are people that produce the foods on our tables, and sadly, not much has been done to address the situation and alleviate their plight. It's actually a terrible indictment on our society in terms of how we moved on but left some of our society behind.
Yeah. Lenicia, are there still generation of workers that today are either active or live in those communities that can attest to how the system was being used and the impact of all of that?
Yes, most definitely. There are generations across that can still attest to the experiences of the Dopstelsel, and who can also speak about the narratives and the experiences. Even up till today, they are still traumatized by the system. They are still every day reliving those days, even though we are in a democratic South Africa, post-democracy, but still people are reliving and living in those times, and not in those times, but the experiences thereof and the trauma.
Okay, would you say, let's stay with you quickly, Lenicia, would you say that the practice is still being used today?
No, the practice isn't used today. However, the scars and the challenges and the negativity of those practices still remains with us today, as Garfield has previously mentioned.
Yeah. And of course, it's important to understand, Gafildin, why those farming communities are in the situation that they are today. Of course, there's very little prospect for them. They live in a very rural part of the world oftentimes. They have a system that was thrusted upon them for a very long period of time, the impact of which it has now created is almost a dependency on alcohol, even though, as Lanisha says, thank goodness it's no longer being used, at least in the mainstream, as a form of payment. But one can almost understand why you sit with almost a generational challenge now of alcohol dependency.
Yes, look, the government made one big intervention in terms of, I think it was the Liquor Act in 2002 or 3, and that was just left there. Also with the Basic Conditions of Employment Act in 1997. Yes, so where it was outlawed that workers should be paid with anything else than in kind, with money and maybe accommodation. So those laws were there, put in place to and implemented. But further than that, the scars, the after effects of those that happened, of those things that happened, was just left to society. And we understand, Tasrik, that we need to keep first ourselves accountable, but we work through government. Government represents us, be it the local municipalities, our provincial administrations, or the national government. And it just occurs here in the Western Cape. Lanisha is quite correct. The females suffer, the children suffer. We as our members, and I'm ashamed to say that some of them are, I would say, career alcohol abusers, but also they abuse their partners and their children and their families, where we sometimes have to intervene with the employer. And government is nowhere to be seen. We have a shortage of social workers. So unfortunately, these communities have been left on their own. There's just as much as trade union, NGOs, and society can do. Government has the resources, but we need to point the finger at industry. They benefited. They have the land. They benefited, and they are still benefiting. And we need to keep them accountable for what their predecessors, some companies still exist today, what they have done or allowed to have done to people that are still working for them and families that are still on their farms.
Yeah. And just, Lanisha, just to build on, I think, a previous question and what Gafildin had to say there, is there then a case to be made here for us having potentially put a stop to the practice, but not putting in the work to reverse the legacies of the practice?
So the practice has stopped. However, we can see that this system has crippled our society. This system has crippled people living on farms, working on farms. And with our hyper austerity budget cuts and the economic system and status of our country, we can see how farm and people living in rural areas continue to be marginalized, continues to experience precarious circumstances, continue to be isolated, where there's no access to resources or access to support systems.
And I want to pick up on that, because I want to go to the Boerland to Dorens area once we do return from the break and hear there from representatives about the impact about alcohol abuse and dependency on those communities, particularly those farming communities. We'll do that and more once we do return from the break. Do stay with us. It is Workers' World. We are talking about the infamous DOP system or the Dopstelsel system, which has been used on farming communities for a very long time. And this was done as a form of payment, the legacy of which is an entire working class community within the farm working sector and their families that live there and have formed communities, having been dependent on alcohol, and that legacy lives with us today. Very grateful, Lanisha from Women on Farms, having reported that the practice isn't in use any longer. There may be some isolated pockets where it is in use, but as a whole system and form of practice, it no longer is the case. Gafildin came to highlight how legislation has also said that you can no longer be paying somebody for their work in a way that doesn't involve money. So it tried to in part respond to this challenge, but we sit with a legacy problem here that, as we've heard in our first segment, that there are other social challenges that come with it and a lack of access to help and assistance in this regard. I want to go to the Boland to Dorens area now and welcome an activist from the Labour Community Media Forum there, Florina Qinisa. She's, of course, an activist, and she also joins us via Zoom here today. Thanks very much for joining us, Florina. We're talking, of course, about the alcohol system and the DOP system in particular that was once in use. What has been the impact of the system in that area of people that you represent, in Boland, Dorens, that sort of farming areas? What has been the impact on alcohol dependency and those communities?
Okay, everyone. This is a sad topic, especially here in the Dorens. A lot, the top system has left a legacy of people being dependent on alcohol, especially those young people. And nowadays, it's no longer the old people that are drinking too much. It's the young generations. I think those generations that they drank those alcohol from their mother's breast, now they are the after effect, and there's no facilities or things to do for young people around these farming areas. You are locked inside the farm. You must be there 7 days a week. There's nothing to do. You just drink alcohol. Monday you go to work. After work you drink. And you see now the top system is no longer there, but still they use grapes, mosak. They are saying mosak because they smash the grapes and put in yeast inside and then put it in the vineyard. They will be drinking the whole day. So that is the effect of the Dopstelsel, because people cannot live without the alcohol anymore.
Yeah. And that's an important point that you're making, not just that younger children are engaging and being dependent on alcohol. Of course, we live in a democratic society where your own choices and liberties are your own and you can make that for yourself. But there's something to be said about access and having it readily available, which I want to pick up with you, Gafildin, about while the system is no more in use, it would appear that those producers of alcohol quite financially, very handsomely get rewarded from the availability and the sale of alcohol in those communities. Should there then be a conversation about reversing the social engineering that had been done, and whether that extends to the way in which alcohol becomes available to those communities?
Yes, Tashrik, let me give you an admission. I served on a structure in the wine industry on transformation, a very powerful and strategic structure in the industry. However, what we were allowed to do and how far we could reach to transform the sector was quite limited. So those are the challenges that we're really facing. I would say I was invited in, but you couldn't bring the necessary changes. So it's very difficult. Imagine someone from outside seeking help, or if you look at Women on Farms, advocating and agitating for change, but they are kept outside, or they are not given the necessary recognition. And
Are you able to, Gafildin, sorry to come in there, but are you able to be a little bit more specific? What was the hindrance? Why couldn't the structure be a lot more impactful in dealing with some of this? Was there gatekeeping? What was it?
No, government is the gatekeepers, because this specific structure, they get their funding from the exports of wine. So you a certain percentage of that exports are allocated for transformation, but the government, through the National Agricultural Marketing Council, the NAMC, they determine how the money must be spent, and the determination weighs heavily in the form of having black-owned farmers and winemakers, and very little of the money are allocated for socioeconomic issues and advancing the rights of workers. So you can sit on a structure, but if you don't determine the rules, it's very difficult. And you find that our sister organizations, like Women on Farms or Ubuntu Rural Women, they do good work, but there are always gatekeepers that prevent the necessary changes to take place. So, in a nutshell, answering your question is there are gatekeepers. It's government in conjunction with the industry that they so willingly represent. Sometimes against the interests of farm workers and the people that work in the rural areas.
Yeah, and Lanisha is from Women on Farms, and I want to just bring it in there about how limited then, as Gafildin says, efforts at transforming the sector in its entirety. We're not just talking about black and white. We're dealing here with the systemic issues that came with that coloniality and the apartheid system, as it were. For me, it sounds like you deliberately drug somebody, make them dependent on the drugs, but you're refusing to give them the social support or even take them to rehabilitation. Is that effectively what has happened here?
Definitely, that is what's happening here, and also knowing that farm workers, they are so dependent on that job because firstly they get housing. The men they get their housing, and so they become so dependent that they are desperate in actual fact, because I have a job, I have housing, my family is okay because they have a roof over their head. And that makes them even more vulnerable to evictions and illegal evictions in that stance, where workers have worked their entire life, farmers, and then they are just illegally evicted from farms. And that is also one of the and causal factors also that is staring us in the face.
And I think that again speaks to how entrenched this culture then is. Florina, do you know, just very quickly, I'm going to have to go for a break, but just do you know whether there are any social programs from social development or others that is trying to deal with this problem?
Not on the farms, because mostly on the farms there's no problems, because you can do is going to work and drinking. And we really need intervention. We really need programs for farm workers and for farm young people that are growing on these areas, because really it is getting bad. It's getting worse by day.
Yeah. Okay, and I think we're not just here talking about the dependence on alcohol, a drug essentially, but also the other issues that come with it. And I want to get into that once we return from the break. Gender-based violence, for instance, as an example of that. Do stay with us. It's our conversation on Workers' World, where we are exploring the legacy of the DOP system, a system in which workers were paid with alcohol for several years. It was a colonial practice, a practice that was particularly refined during apartheid, and the legacy of which we sit with today, which is why there's a high level of dependency on alcohol in these farming communities. They also span generations, as we've heard in this program so far, including the warning being sounded there in the Dorens, Boland area, where Florina was telling us about how younger generations are now becoming increasingly dependent on alcohol. I want to now deal with the issue around gender-based violence as one of the consequences of this very terrible tragedy that we have, and ask Florina whether in these communities where alcohol use is quite widely the practice, is gender-based violence as a consequence of that? How prevalent is gender-based violence in these communities?
Well, gender-based violence is very high because when those people are drunk, start fighting or abusing the partner, but the problem is they fight and then open a case and then they withdraw the case again. So there's no follow-up of cases because they open cases and then close the cases. So these things are happening continuously, and they are afraid to come to us so that we help them because I don't know what is wrong with them, because when you start going to them and telling them what to do or to guide them where to go, they will agree with you, but at the end of the day they won't go because we go to the court with them, but at the end of the day they withdraw the cases. So the cases don't go far, but the violence is continuing and they are killing each other, they are stabbing each other. So this is really a huge problem, and I think maybe if government or organizations can stand together and try and help these farm workers,
Yeah.
so that at least if something like this gender-based violence can happen, you must know what to do, and you will be supported.
Lanisha, your primary constituency, of course, are women. Women on farms that does really excellent work on these, farming communities at the moment. What are your members telling you about, and what are you observing in regards to alcohol dependency and the consequence that come with that, which sometimes is high levels of gender-based violence? And we, of course, as Florina had told us there are cases where husband and wife routinely ends up beating each other and abusing each other, but it doesn't quite deal with the system of gender-based violence, as it were. So maybe just give us your account on what your members and what you're observing at the moment in regards to alcohol abuse and the consequence that comes with that.
Yes, so our constituencies are women. And so what I've observed is that there is a interrelationship and interrelatedness between alcoholism and alcohol dependency and gender-based violence. But where women on farms role come in is that we conscientize women around what is your rights. What is your right in terms of domestic violence? Because we have also observed that women do not know their rights in terms of women staying in rural areas. We are focusing on the rural context. And so women on farms empowers these women to actually know their rights, but to also claim those rights by doing advocacy and activism and awareness campaigns on farms, in their communities. And so, yes, there is a relationship and there is the interrelatedness, but also women's advocacy and activism, and most importantly, organizing. As Inke has said, that women go and they withdraw cases. And oftentimes we also experience that there's no choice because they are dependent on the male partner because they have a house, they have family, they have kids, and also the seasonality of work as well. And if we look around the whole policy around the minimum wage, etc. So there are all interrelated factors that are also a underlying contributing factor to this entire problem that we're speaking about. And yes, that is definitely from in what I've observed and what we do and how we go about in addressing this challenge.
Yeah, and it seems, Rafieldin, that we have this a little bit mixed up. That, you know, we as a national conversation in this country, from time to time, we debate things such as labor brokers. We debate working conditions of the farm workers. We debate, you know, what is the minimum wage, etc., for some of these farm workers and the sectoral determinations and so on and so forth. But we don't quite deal with the underlying fundamental issues that lead us to high prevalence of gender-based violence, alcoholism, and the fact that sometimes these people cannot even go to work because, you know, again, the legacies that confront them as a form of a culture almost that exists within these communities at the moment. What is your assessment about how to begin to approach and tackle some of these things? Because I'm certain you can't deal with gender-based violence without dealing with the alcohol dependency problem and then without being honest about the legacy of apartheid.
The problem that we have is that alcohol is sold on a staggering scale from cheap to very expensive. So the cheaper and lesser quality wines are at the bottom of the shelf or in people's faces. So if you go to Grabouw, Sittersdal, Wellington, certain supermarket chains, they have alcohol sections. On a Friday afternoon or a Saturday morning, I would challenge our listeners and our studio guests, go there. You will find our farm workers have easy access, but it's also quite affordable for them to purchase these alcohol products. So that's the one issue. The other issue is farmers, especially on wine farms. If you have a problem with alcohol or you are in rehabilitation, you will lack if you work in that that environment from time to time. And yes, gender-based violence is then a negative consequence or effect thereof. And as I said previously, we had cases where our male members assaulted their female partners or the children because they were intoxicated, because of the problems that they are experiencing. And if you ask what can be done, we should look at how easy it is for people to purchase these wines. If we pride ourselves as a country that we make some of the best wines and we want to compete like with the Frances and the Italians and elsewhere, then we should make it a niche product and start start with a healing process and like we do with interventions with certain products and pricing, etc. The government has it within their capacity. They just do not have the political will to do it. So those are the type of interventions that I would want to see. And unfortunately, the victims are the children that go to school the next morning. That member of or that constituent of Lanisha, she still has to go and perform her chores and her work the next morning with those scars. So it's a problem that society needs to address as a collective. But I've been around the block too many times, Tasri. They take you just in a circle. So you start somewhere, 3 years down the line, things collapse and nothing has been done, while millions of rands has been made in the process. There is money, there is funds available as we speak.
But it's just not being used.
There are funds. I'm talking about millions of rands of funds that are available in the industry that can seriously make an impact
Yeah,
Indeed.
but
But
why should people care? You know, they're just out there on the outskirts in the rural communities where they left forgotten, and sometimes even worse, some of them get evicted because of the practice. What happens to them? We'll deal with that after the break. Please stay with us. We are talking about a very difficult subject, which increasingly makes me believe that we're not going to get on top of it if we don't have an honest conversation about the impact of alcoholism and its origins, its roots in a dope system that was a colonial and an apartheid relic, the legacy of which continues to live today. And what's even more disheartening is that younger generations have now adapted to this lifestyle to the point where not only is it difficult to deal with it, but there's also other accompanying challenges, like this country that faces gender-based violence as a very real issue, and of course crime as well. But there's one particular practice that sometimes is almost unique to farm workers, which is the concept of evictions, because oftentimes these farm workers together with their families, live on the farms where they work, where they toil. And oftentimes they don't have tenure of property and they get kicked out of the property. So if alcohol is a problem, I'm certain sometimes, you know, the worker would be drunk and find it difficult to come to work, and sometimes does come to work under the influence, until which point, of course, as we now know, that sometimes this type of labor is dispensable very quickly and easily. What then happens in the case, Florina, just to go to you as a start, what happens to those that are evicted? Where do they go? And given the fact that they're already suffering with an alcohol addiction problem, what happens to them?
Those people that have been evicted on the farms, they come to the nearest to put up checks, and they don't have anything, they don't have money, so they come and put up a check and start a new life in the community. And it's very sad because you live for many years on the farm, and at the end of the day, you've been evicted with nothing. And you see the farmers, they run away of paying those people those years that they were staying on the farm. Now they just evict them and then they close their case. Even if us as activists go there to question them, you must make an appointment, and then you cannot go anytime and question them. They are so clever. Their gates are closed, and you struggle. And those people, they don't have a say because the farmer knows they are dependent on alcohol. So if they say something, he will say you are drunk or something. So it is very difficult, and it's sad. It's really sad.
Yeah. Let me go to Lenisha, and we do apologize there for the audio and video connection to Florina. Of course, she talks to us from a part of the Boland rural part of the city at the moment, and the internet connection not the best coming from that part of the world where she finds herself. So let's go to Lenisha very quickly and build on that thought around how oftentimes these members are evicted. They have to put up a shack, as I've heard Florina highlight there. And of course, you then sit with another statistic of homelessness and social assistance being required. Is that in the majority of cases, is that what happens?
So yes, in the majority, that is definitely what happens. And also we have seen where workers with dwellers, they are evicted from farm illegally. And so in order for you to be evicted from the farmer needs to apply for an eviction order from court. And usually these orders take quite some time and it's quite expensive because there's a whole lot of lawyers and so forth. And so hence we also empower our farm workers and dwellers to know that when the farmer wants to evict you, know your rights. It's not just about being evicted, but due process. So was there an order? How long was the order? Or were you just given a document you need to sign and you don't understand what's written in that document because it's not in your language? So all those processes that needs to be followed, and also then having them to be actually advocating about the issue of eviction.
Yeah, which again, Khafildin, we're dealing here with secondary but equally massive and burdensome problems. That evictions in and of itself is a challenge, but the person that now gets evicted is dealt a double whammy: nowhere to go, family to look after, and alcohol and addiction that is still very much a feature of their lives.
Yes, and it's unfortunate because very few people or organizations that would be able to assist those people. They are left under bridges, they are left on the side of the roads, and the farmers just continue with their operations. So, like Lenita indicated, it's the eviction should be legal, okay, and it's very seldom that you can challenge a legal eviction. But when it's done illegally, there are also severe consequences for employers and landowners, because you have to have expoliation, or with an expoliation order, you are returned with the status quo. But farm workers don't have access to those things, and it's the good organizations, some of which are women on farms and others, that come to the fore and assist. As a trade union, we at times don't have the manpower and the capacity to assist, but we do rely on and fund certain challenges with regards to, even if it's not our members. We work with organizations. If we hear about an eviction, we assist, because at some stage that those workers they contributed to society, to the economy.
Sure.
And we can't
Khafildin, I hear you, and I'm going to run out of time very quickly, but I want to just round off on this point. You said that when you were part of that council, your impact sometimes was limited to a whole host of challenges. If we're asking government to effectively social reverse engineer this current situation, where do you think they can start?
I think they should allocate more manpower, assistance, employ more social workers, or advantage rural areas with more social workers. Allocate funds. Have the political will to intervene. But just lastly, in the Western Cape, farm workers organizations, we are on our own. We have a hostile provincial government. We have a hostile Drakensberg municipality and other municipalities which are linked with this Western Cape administration. So they are pro-business. They are pro-farmer. They currently have the national and the provincial competence in agriculture. So it's actually a double whammy for us now, where you won't even be able to make a dent on the national level, at least to say on a provincial level.
It's certainly a challenge. It most definitely is a challenge, and I wonder then whether the political party in control in this part of the region, and the very lovely business relationship that they do have with the owners of the industry, the captains of the industry, whether that is in fact in the best interest of these workers that need urgent intervention as we speak. With that, we have to conclude our program here today. Thank you very much once again for having tuned into Workers' World this week as we look at the DOP system and the impact on those communities most affected. We'll do a lot more of these and others once we do return next week. Until then, have a lovely week. Thank you very much for tuning in. Bye-bye.